Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to another session of the Reparation Information Thought Series. I'm Jessica Ann Mitchell. Aiwuyor, Executive Director of the National Black Cultural Information
Can't
Trust.
hear
And
you.
this series is, can you hear me? Okay. And this series is co-hosted with Nkechi Taifa, director of the Reparation Education Project. And this is our fourth year hosting this webinar series, and we're just glad to be in community with you. On March 25th, history was made by an overwhelming vote of 123 nations. The UN General Assembly adopted a landmark resolution declaring the trafficking of enslaved Africans and racialized chattel enslavement as the gravest crime against humanity. And we will unpack this with four expert panelists. Right now, I'll hand it over to Nkechi.
Thank you so very much. And thank you all for joining this very historic discussion of the Reparation Information Thought Series. I'm going to introduce two of our panelists, and then Jam will introduce the other two, and then we're going to get ready to get started. We have Belle Ribeiro-Addy, a member of parliament from the Labour Party of British-Ghanian descent. She grew up in South London and was educated at Bradford University and Queen Mary's University. She is a former Black Students Officer and convener on anti-racism for the National Union of Students, and she chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group for African Reparations, which has long advocated for a formal state apology for African chattel enslavement from the British state, alongside the establishment of an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice as a foundation for Britain to begin to address its legacy of enslavement and colonization. We also have Jasmine Mickens, who entered the reparations space as a scholar at Harvard University. She is a globally recognized Pan-African impact strategist specializing in reparations and reparative investment. Her work synthesizes historical insight, geopolitical analysis, and diaspora strategy to identify and activate high impact investment opportunities across Africa and its global diaspora. With over a decade of leadership in global philanthropy, she advises governments, philanthropic institutions, and international bodies on policy innovation, reparative capital, and systems level transformation. Jam, can you introduce our remaining two panelists?
Yes. Um, we also have with us today Roger Wareham, a lawyer and political activist of over 4 decades. He is a member of the December 12th movement and its international secretariat. Roger is also the International Secretary General of the International Association Against Torture. He has annually presented evidence of human rights violations in the United States and other parts of the world at assemblies of the United Nations Human Rights Council and its other bodies that meet in Geneva, Switzerland. He was a lead attorney in the historic lawsuits filed in the United States federal district courts in 2002, suing private corporations for reparations due to the descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States, and was co-counsel representing 3 of the 5 Black and Latino men wrongfully convicted in the Central Park jogger case of 1989. We also have with us Vickie Casanova-Willis, an independent human rights expert and senior fellow with the Office of HBCU Development and International Cooperation. She is former executive director of the U.S. Human Rights Network and past president of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. She co-founded the International Civil Society Working Group for the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent. She has testified to the Organization of American States, Inter-American Commission, Universal Periodic Review, Committee Against Torture, International Convention to Eliminate All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Permanent Forum, UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent, UN General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council regarding human rights violations. She served as one of the jurists in the 2021 International Tribunal charging the United States, with human rights abuses. Welcome all.
All right,
Oh,
now let's get this ball started. Jam, you have any other?
yes. Just wanted to let you know your papers are hitting your mic.
Is that
Just
me?
yes.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Also, I think it might be a good idea. Well, you can overrule me if you wish. To open up the chat. What do you think?
Sure, I'll get it
To
going.
the webinar participants. Okay, so this first question is for all panelists. Not a long answer, just a brief answer, and then your next question will be, your substantive answer. But generally speaking, how do you feel about this moment in history where the overwhelming number of countries around the globe supported Ghana's declaration that the transatlantic trafficking in human beings and chattel enslavement was the gravest crime against humanity? How do you feel about this moment? And Belle, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. And I think it's important, as it was noted at the beginning, just how historic this moment is, not because the world has suddenly discovered something new, or that even people of African descent have discovered something new. It's the truth that we've known for centuries, but it's because the international community has finally said in overwhelming numbers that it agrees with us. So when that number of nations come together and realize that human beings being racialized, enslaved, trafficked was the gravest crime against humanity. It's not a diplomatic formality anymore. It's a verdict, and that's a verdict that has been delayed for generations, and it carries real moral and political weight, and it scared a lot of people. And I think that's important to note, that it has scared the establishment. And usually, when something scared the establishment, you're on the right track. And what struck me the most about all of this is who voted for it and who didn't. The countries that have been enslaved, exploited, colonized, they voted yes, and the countries that did the enslaving, the exploiting, and the colonization, they voted no, or they abstained, as staying silent, and that really tells you everything you need to know about them. But I think that this moment belongs really to the people who never stopped demanding it. There's activists, the educators, the elders, our descendants who kept this fight alive when loads of institutions ignored them, and when people kept telling us that it's something that was never going to happen. So the resolution is really their vindication.
Thank you so very much, Belle. And you're right. This movement, this moment belongs to us who have been on the front lines for so many years. Jasmine, what about you? Generally speaking, how do you feel about this moment in history?
Yeah, so first I would say that there's a sense of gratitude that came over me when I saw that vote on that day. And it's gratitude to the ancestors who really began the fight, not just for repair, but for their dignity within the first hours that this crime was committed on the shores of Africa. So that was the first grounding way for me to describe how I felt. I would also describe it as having a renewed sense of hope in humanity, because if we look around at the news that we're getting just every day, it can be discouraging to think that you can find one of these hopeful slithers of a victory. And so that renewed sense of hope just comes from a place of seeing that, one, the world is now affirming what we already knew was true, but that the world is ready to talk about reparations. So that's really what I see as being one of the proudest parts of this moment.
A renewed sense of hope in humanity. Thank you, Jasmine. Roger, what about you? This moment in history, and now you've had many moments in the past.
Does that mean that I'm old? um, I think I agree with what the prior two folks have said. I think it's a moment in history that built upon a moment in history, because this isn't the first time the international community recognizes the Durban Declaration and Program of Action that came out of the Durban World Conference 25 years ago. represented the first time that the international community, a consensus where nobody dissented from it except for the countries that walked out, which was the United States and Israel, agreed to the declaration that the transatlantic slave trade and slavery were crimes against humanity, and that reparations were due the descendants of the victims. What this does is it builds on that, and it sharpens it. Durban was a consensus. It wasn't voted on in the sense that it was how many for, how many against. It was a consensus meant that everybody who was there signed on to it, which meant that all of the Western European countries who hadn't walked out with the United States and Israel had agreed to it, and they were stuck with it, and they've been fighting that ever since. What I think that this this resolution does, it sharpens Durban. It gets much more specific. It talks about trafficking as opposed to a slave trade. And trade implies that there was some equality on both sides of that deal. It speaks to the trafficking and the chattelized nature of us, and it drew the lines. And so the lines are drawn. The usual suspects ended up on the same side. The United States got another ally in Argentina, which was the hiding place for Nazis after World War II. So it wasn't a surprise there. I think what it does, it let me just say this: Durban was a success, one not only for the content, but also for the process. And the process that brought about the Durban Declaration and Program of Action was some real unity between the African continent and the African diaspora. And I think that this represents a higher level of that same process and content. As with Durban, now the question always becomes, what are we going to do to make this, to make them implement it? As one of the observers said at the when this was going on, the question is, how do we create a situation which makes it impossible, or it doesn't make it affordable for them to not comply? How do we make it so that they not complying is a greater cost than complying? And I think that's what's put before us.
And we're going to be getting to that, in fact,
I
in
do.
terms of what comes next. Thank you very much, Roger. And Vickie, how do you feel about this moment in history?
I am still grateful and celebrating internally, right? Being present at such a truly momentous time, and being able to start that morning at the African burial ground, really uplifting the very, very spiritual and ancestral importance of this time. I was not in Durban. My late husband was, and did a lot of that work with you, Brother Roger Wareham, and others. This felt like our Durban, if you will, and by no means erasing it, by no means, but it 25 years later felt so critically affirming. I guess the word I'm thinking of is just a referendum. It was a resounding referendum. Not only that it's time that people are ready to talk about reparations, but that reparations are owed, full reparation, and the time is now. What I saw and felt was true unity, not lockstep and uniformity, but unity. And just the excellence with which even the side events, the things that these two organizations, that Reparation Education Project and others, Jasmine and others helped organize to ensure that people who could not even be in the UN could participate through a global watch party and so forth. It helped acknowledge for me that this is about all of us. And the efforts that were made successfully to put that into place and actualize it, I think did justice to the actual concrete, tangible resolution that has come forth. And now we know that we've got work to do, but it can be done. We know who's with us. We know who we need to still work on and work with. So it's amazing. And I'm very grateful and doubling down on my commitment. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so very much. And I want to, we're going to give each of you an opportunity to respond to specific questions. And I know Belle, who is usually in the UK, but she's at the UN right now, and I know might have to hop off. So I'm going to let you ask your question first, and that and the closing question in case you're not going to be able to be here for the a whole time. But Belle, as a member of parliament, you have been very outspoken about the issue of reparations. Can you tell us about your organizing work, about the UK's abstention vote, what message that sent, both politically and morally, if there's been any backlash to the UK's, to those who oppose the UK's abstention, and also from a movement perspective, just how do we turn international recognition and global human rights frameworks into everyday grassroots community level power and impact? I know that was a lot because I put a number of your questions together because I know you're not, but so let me know if you need me to repeat any of it. But just talk to us about your work, the UK vote, backlash, if any, and how we bring this global moment into grassroots advocacy.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And what I might do is I might answer the first and the last questions together and then get onto the UK vote towards the end. So I chair the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations, which is a cross-party group in UK's parliament, and we work specifically towards changing policy on reparations within the UK. We work on the instruction of our community, so our secretariat are actually grassroots based organisations, and other than committing to an apology, and that's one of the things that we've tried to get our government to do. On the same day that the UN resolution was tabled, we took a petition on the floor of the House of Commons and demanded an apology from the UK government for the crime of trafficking and enslavement of African peoples, but also for the formulation of an all-party Parliamentary Commission for Truth and Reparative Justice. And what the aim of this is to do is, firstly, we cannot begin to realise what reparations should be if we still don't understand fully what was done. And there are many of us that talk in this space all the time, and it's something I've been doing for a few years now. But I tell you, every month I learn something new. We don't even know the extent to the crimes that were committed. There are so many things that are hidden. One thing that I know my country did in particular is keep a lot of records. I think about the things that are that were looted from certain countries and kept in and now being stored in places like the British Museum. They literally wrote records of their looting. All of these things that have been hidden from us. So the commission of inquiry is actually about allowing all of that truth to come to light, but also allowing the different grassroots organisations to present their truth, to present how things have impacted them. But it's only then that we can begin to look at how we are going to address it, and it has to be given the level of parliamentary scrutiny and parliamentary support for it to have that legitimacy. And that's one of the things that the campaign has tried to do over the years for so many years. And that's another thing why the resolution was so important. The reparations movement has been seen as a fringe one, the type of one that is often laughed out of the chambers in the House of Commons, and people turn around and say things like it's not something that can be ever achieved. The people that talk about this are X, Y, or Z, and it's nothing that we can be paying attention to. So, I mean, I think it's very key that we've got there. I think it's very key that we're pushing towards this all-party parliamentary commission for an inquiry for truth and reparatory justice, and bringing the grassroots along with us. Along with that, we look towards obviously this formal apology as starting as a legal basis. We look at all the different types of reparations that can come about. So, educational reparations, environmental reparations, health reparations. There are all these different things that could begin to address the issues that have come about from racialized chattel enslavement, and because people keep focusing on the money. Whenever we talk to them, we never get to a point of discussing these very key issues like the mortality rates, the black maternal health figures for which are the same in the UK and the US, even though we have completely different healthcare systems. We also have a particular project at the moment, which is called Laying Our Ancestors to Rest. There are so many human remains of our ancestors in different museums, some of them in boxes, being treated despicably. We recently found one in the university in the UK that the dons of the university were using to drink wine out of the skull of an African woman. Very awful things like this. So trying to make sure that the restitution of those human remains and the sale of them, the restitution of those human remains happens, and the sale of them is banned, and that they're given proper burials in line with their customs. And bearing in mind, some of these individuals, some of these specific people know who they are. Their ancestors are living and know exactly who they are. You know, right across Europe, there are the heads of freedom fighters in jars, preserved like trophies. So it's about that respect, and also looking at the restitution of artifacts. All of those things are extremely important. But on to the UK's abstention. Obviously, I believe that was a complete moral failure, and I think it's very important that we're direct about that. I'm often accused of talking down my country, and I think that's quite unfair. Just as a mother would with a child, you don't just say that, you know, clap your hands for every bad thing that somebody's done as a form of encouragement. I don't believe it's patriotic at all to let my country continue to do the wrong thing. The world is changing, but also on this instance, they were completely wrong. Britain didn't just participate in, the enslavement and trafficking of peoples of African descent. It was one of the primary architects. It was a primary beneficiary. And when our country abolished the trade, as they like to call it, it paid compensation not to the enslaved, but to the enslavers. And we never finished paying off that compensation because the loan was so huge that they took out until 2015. That means my taxes that I've paid in the past went towards paying people that formerly enslaved my ancestors, people who are still rich off that income today. So the debt has never been paid to those that have been wrong. And I think it's wrong that Britain could not even bring itself to say yes. And I think the abstention really sends a very clear political message that, you know, the government is prioritising its discomfort over the truth. And that is a very clear moral message as well. And that the moral message that it's not accepting responsibility, and in not accepting responsibility, the crime continues. And I think that is a key point. In not accept, all those countries that refuse to accept responsibility continue in the crime. And the backlash has been real. And, you know, they continue to come after those of us that would make these very specific points. And actually, it's been very revealing. And what's been the most revealing about it is more so than ever, those institutions and those individuals are more afraid, as I made a point. They're taking it more seriously. And that means that, you know, we're hearing people actually try and put forward policy positions, and this is not necessarily the government, but some of the main opposition. And one of those was that anybody that aren't, you know, has shown positive policy in the country towards reparations, any sort of aid that was in place should be removed, and that their visas should be revoked. Things like that. And you've heard that come out, and I think the most interesting thing for me has been the response to that. And you know, those countries have actually stood up, and some have actually said, try it. And I don't mean that and I know it sounds tough to make it seem like it was well, no, actually it was a provocation. It was a very, very clear provocation. And I don't think they meant that flippantly, but what it really shows is a change in world order.
Yes.
Imagine what would happen if they did do that. If they did do that, who loses out more? Mm-hmm. And that should tell you about where peoples of African descent, where their place now is in the world. It makes a massive, massive difference, I think, to how we view ourselves and how we view this campaign moving forward. So yeah, there is absolutely that backlash, but the reality is that as a people, globally, we have been trodden on so much, the extent is to which that it's almost do what you will and we will survive. So the idea that you could come and say that you're taking anything away makes no sense, because there's a phrase that people used to use, that rule Britannia, and this is the UK, rule Britannia rules the waves, and we will never ever be slaves, but no one else is going to be a slave either.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is that things have changed vastly, and that individual countries can now stand up, and they can stand up as a bloc. And for that reason, we really, in a political sense, should change course. In a moral sense, we always should have changed course. But if we're not careful, we will find ourselves fully on the wrong side of this. And as I said, morally it's an issue, but politically it could be an even worse one.
So thank you very much, Member of Parliament Bell Ribeiro-Addy. I know that you might have to hop off, so thank you for doing the first and last questions. And I don't know if anyone had specific questions for you, but we'll make sure we get that to you if you have to run. I'm going to turn it over to Jam to introduce the next question. Thank you, my sister.
Yes, this next question is for Jasmine. You played key roles behind the scenes in mobilizing support for this historic resolution. What did it take to get this across the finish line, and how are African and Caribbean nations, particularly Ghana, positioning themselves in this global reparations moment?
Thanks so much, Jessica. So yes, my role was one of the technical experts who supported both the drafting of the resolution and the 5 rounds of negotiations that took place at the United Nations. I was a part of a very incredible team of diligent experts, researchers, and diplomats. And so that's the first thing. It took a team. And the second thing is that it definitely took political courage of President Mahama, who announced this vision in September 2025 at the UN General Assembly. One of the things that stood out in this process was, there's a saying that you cannot wake someone who is pretending to be asleep. And no amount of primary sources, evidence, well put together legal arguments or research was enough to change some people's minds when it came to this resolution and the historical evidence that it stands on. I say that because the title itself was a huge hurdle to overcome because of the word gravest. So the resolution's title is the United Nations Declaration of the Trafficking and Racialized Chattel Enslavement of Africans as the Gravest Crime Against Humanity. Now, how people heard that was African people suffered most, or this is the worst thing to ever happen to any group, which you could argue it was. But if you want to focus this on the historical evidence, the resolution is actually speaking to the gravity and the world-breaking scale of the crime itself. And we structured this with a focus on it being a world-breaking event because it did fundamentally reorganize the global economic, legal, racial, governance, and ecological systems of the world. And so rather than treating the chattel enslavement of Africans as this tragic chapter in history that only impacted Black people, this resolution asserts that it became a foundational structural rupture that reconfigured the modern world for everybody, producing these enduring and unparalleled material and epistemic consequences that again affect everybody. And so it's on this basis that the resolution is asserting that we need world remaking from this world breaking moment that inevitably includes reparations as a way to transform the same systems, the economic, the legal, and the social systems. And I think this is really important because this is why we need to push back on people who thought that this was about creating a hierarchy of oppression. It's not a hierarchy of oppression, and it asserts that we are understanding the trafficking and chattel enslavement of Africans as a structuring force of a new world that broke the world for all of mankind. And this structuring force transcends not just time, but geography. So I think, that's one of the most critical points that I wanted to make about the title, because it's not about who suffered most, but rather what systems did this create and how are we all needing to structurally analyze these systems and work to repair these systems. The other thing that I think is a critical part of the resolution that was a hurdle was this idea that African people did not have humanity until international law declared so. This idea that chattel enslavement was legal at the time. This resolution asserts African jurisprudence in a way that we don't see often in our own history books, but definitely not in UN documents. And so it asserts that, one, our ancestors had laws, and that slavery was always a crime. It rejects the idea that slavery should have been a crime, which is what we saw in the Durban language, but rather affirms unapologetically that it was a crime, and that there should be no statute of limitations. And what I like too is that it references very specific historical documents, such as the Mandan Charter of 1235, which is one of the earliest in the world constitutions in West African oral tradition that affirms the right to personhood, the right to bodily autonomy of African people, which is contrary to what we learn about our history, which is that it began with enslavement and that, again, our community was not discovered until after European Age of Discovery or UN international law. And I think these are just important components of how we affirm and correct the historical record of our history, and also just reassert the resilience of our ancestors that we did not. Okay, the Mandan Charter is the document. I see some of the notes in the chat. The Mandan Charter, MANDEN. I will put it in the chat for you. But yeah, I just wrap up here and say that this is why the resolution on its substance and the title are critical and what makes this really a milestone document in our history. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. I think we're moving to Roger. You were an integral part of the mobilization in Durban in 2001, bringing 400 people from the diaspora. Tell us what happened 25 years ago and what lessons must we take from Durban today to avoid repeating the history of powerful words devoid of concrete implementation.
Well, I think as I said, the victory of Durban, which was a historic victory, for a Pan-African victory, came about because we had been working as an NGO at the UN from about 1989 and had also participated in prior UN World Conferences. And we understood that if you want to have something concrete come out of it, it's got to come out of the actual conference and not the NGO meeting, which goes before and sort of overlaps. And when we sat down with, in particular with the National Black United Front, to put together the Durban 400, we had an agenda that we thought would represent a victory coming out of that World Conference. And the agenda was that there were three issues we were focusing on. One was a declaration of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery and colonialism as a crime against humanity. Secondly was reparations for the descendants of the victims. And third was a recognition of the economic basis of racism. And in that process, with the different regional meetings that preceded the World Conference, the international meetings, we were able to meet Black folks from throughout the diaspora who came to the World Conference with an agenda of their particular grievances from racism and racial discrimination. But we were able to get everyone to unite on that. And so that was the importance of Durban in terms of we really forced the world, and particularly in the former settler colonies and colonizing countries really up against the wall, so much so that they either had to leave or become part of the consensus. The lesson from Durban was then, before we left Durban, we said, what is it that people are going to have to do to follow up on this? That we all had to go back to whatever national groupings we came from and take up the question of reparations, that it was not simply wait for another international meeting. And so the lesson from Durban was that there were two lessons from Durban. One was that the West is relentless in trying to erase history, and I think the point that I think Jasmine was making, or around if somebody's pretending to be asleep because they don't want to be woke up, if that's one aspect of it, and that they've done everything within their power to erase Durban, and we can anticipate that their response to the African resolution that just passed is going to be that, and has probably already begun in ways that we can't realize. So the most important thing becomes, what do we take back? What do we do to mobilize people on the ground? We subscribe to Frederick Douglass's famous edict that power concedes nothing without a demand. And so that the question becomes, how do we bring that demand away? This time it makes it, as I said earlier, makes the cost of non-compliance so much so that they have to agree to our demand. The lesson that we drew from that was that in this 25th year of the anniversary of the Durban Declaration and the World Conference, we saw using that as a catalyst, and this was even before the African resolution passed the GA. We saw using that as a catalyst to pull people together around whatever they were doing with reparations, to try and coordinate that within, different, I guess, than the UK. In the United States, because of Durban, I think Durban was a catalyst for getting people involved and really making reparations an even more legitimate issue in reality it is, but people's perception of that, I think, changed after Durban. So therefore, you found in the United States that there were different expressions of reparations. There were Evanstown, there was Asheville. There were different towns and cities that were making resolutions or developing commissions to look at reparations. California as a state, had one, and in different universities. What we saw as the strength of that was that it popularized reparations in people's mind. The weakness of it is that, in the final analysis, it is the government of the United States that's going to have to deal with the question of reparations. So to the extent that the smaller expressions of reparations keep it in people's mind, but the weakness of it is that some people may think, oh, my son got a scholarship to Georgetown because he can show he's a descendant of one of the enslaved Africans who were sold so that they could continue to exist, can weaken it. So the lesson from Durban is, let's take the propaganda value of the resolution, and let's go to our communities. Let's show people how reparations relates to the everyday issues that they deal with in terms of their lack of housing or inadequate health care or education, employment. We have to draw that connection, because then that will be the force that creates the force of our people organized, that will bring us much closer to the implementation of that resolution. I yield.
Thank you so very much, Roger. Vickie, I want to turn to you now. You were present in New York at the official wreath laying ceremony at the African Burial Grounds inside the United Nations at the high-level event where President Dramani Mahama and others eloquently spoke. As part of the live global watch party on the day of the historic vote, as well as the side event hosted by New Yorkers for Reparations and Reparation Education Project, where each of your companion co-panelists spoke. What did you feel as a witness in these spaces? What was the energy like? And as a representative of HBCUs, what role can academic institutions play in advancing this moment beyond the United Nations?
I honestly could feel the ancestors, right? Literally could feel the energy, and also the sense that there is a role for each of us to play. We've heard about this heavy, heavy lifting that so many people here did to help ensure that this historic vote could come to pass. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Global Watch Party, the side sessions, the things that allow people to help unpack, because it is more than just a moment, right? It is more than just a symbolic document. There's language there that transforms psychologically how people think about themselves and how others think about us, right? Not slaves. These were people, human beings, our ancestors who were trafficked, right, and enslaved. And then looking at the racialized nature of the chattelized enslavement, the masterful, you could just see in what was happening. I could reflect back to what I know must happen in, as you mentioned, Jasmine, you all had 5 rounds of not just revisions, but it's debate, right? There's as much pushback ongoing to try to prevent the sort of strong language and actionable language in these documents. So from an HBCU perspective, I would say I'm just thrilled, really, and clear that the work begins now, right, for many, many more of us. Because there is this is both aspirational, but it's guidelines. It calls for follow-up to the Secretary General with regards to a report. And we best believe and know that there's reverse advocacy, if you will, or backlash, pushing hard to minimize or roll back that report, right? And we must not allow that to happen. We must continue to show up and support and know that just because someone has the mic and has, as you mentioned, the political fortitude, and just it was excellently done, even in terms of the delivery. We can't back off, and we must continue to support and work. So what I would say HBCUs, for example, have been doing, especially the network, Office of HBCU Development and International Cooperation, and this is our 10th year, but it literally was founded to help support the human rights legacy, which we're not taught here in the U.S. So that's another significant impact, I believe, of this work and this resolution, is that the not just the word reparations, but the understanding that it's rooted in something much more broad than civil rights. It's human rights, which is economic, social, cultural, political, civil, and so for a campus tradition, I'll just put it that way, because you don't necessarily have to be an active student or professor on an HBCU campus. We know the alumni network and the legacy and the communities are deep and wide. So being able to study these documents, some of the things that can happen is maybe it's content for a course, for sure, or an assignment. But when we look at what is going to need to happen now, this movement, we've got to coalesce with a shared vision, right? And that's tough in the Americas with regards to this chattelization, and how, even as Roger mentioned, there's local commissions, and that's great. We need to have local, national, and international work, but perhaps the HBCUs can help anchor both from a standpoint of the right to institutions, that we've advocated for the longest. I was at the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent just 2 weeks ago in Geneva, Switzerland, which is a product of the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. And one of the things that people were looking at was the restitution aspect. And it's not just returning artifacts, right? It's beyond that. There's much more. So I would just say that to be able to have both study groups, but the research, the collaboration, things that help really dissect the language and even envision, like, what could reparations fully be and how to implement it. It's not just up to the economists. It's not just up to the lawyers, right? It's not just up to quote unquote activists. There's a role to play. And I would just say HBCUs, part of what we know is that it matters to walk into a space that reminds us that we are part of a majority of people of color around the world, not a minority. It matters to not have your interest in this topic be shut down. It matters to have an understanding of the right to self-determination. And that's what I will definitely pledge to help assist with in whatever way that I can. I know HBCUs have for a very, very long time been living reparation and bringing it in many different ways. So they absolutely must be a part of this work as well. And I don't know if anybody said to you specifically today, but thank you also, Sis Nkechi, very, very much.
The collective we. Thank you very much, Vickie. And the final question for all panelists, just very briefly, in whatever order you want to respond, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jam to field the Q&A. But from a movement perspective, how do we turn international recognition and global human rights frameworks into grassroots, community level power and impact? And I think I see Roger's hand. He wants to go first on that. So take it away, Attorney Roger Wareham.
Oh, you could read my hand. Yeah, I think we have a campaign. We want everybody to mark the date August 29th. August 29th is around the time that the Durban World Conference began. And before, as like I said, before the Ghanaian resolution, we thought that during this 25th year of the celebration of that victory, we should get people together. So what we're trying to do is to have people who are dealing with reparations around the country use August 29th as a teaching moment in terms of just the grassroots areas of the country, that we want everybody doing something rather than have one large demonstration in Washington, D.C. like we did in 2002. We're asking groups that are dealing with reparations to have something in the area, a rally, a forum, or something that would teach about the Ghanaian, the African resolution, the DDPA, and why reparations is important or should be important to them. And we've already started meeting with folks around the country and in the New York, New Jersey area, and have plans around things that are going to happen. But what we want people, what we hope people will leave with is the date 8/29. For information around what we're talking about, you can just go to the website D12M. That's D, the numbers 1, 2, the letter M.com, and you'll pull up 8/29. So we think that that's something really concrete. It means that it's not taking people away from the work they do, but it's integrating this whole question of reparations nationally and internationally as something very concrete that can then be a continuation, not an event, but a continuation of the organizing that's going to be necessary to really push the issue of reparations. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Roger. Any of the other panelists want to respond about how we turn international recognition and global human rights frameworks into grassroots, community level power and impact? We already got 8/29. That date is sealed in my memory.
If I may just jump in, Nkechi.
Yes, Jasmine.
I would say the number one thing we have to do is to protect our memory. Our ancestors have done so much in litigation, in revolutions, in the books that were written, and so much of what they have left to us. And in this environment where there is a deliberate effort to erase our history and to make sure that we forget our history, we have to protect our memory and the memory of everything that our ancestors have done. And our elders, the elders who are on this call, including you, Nkechi, elders who are not on this call, we have to protect that. And I think I would just close by saying you can't get reparations for something you don't remember. And so with all of the efforts to make sure we don't remember what happened and what we're fighting for, down to the age of kids in daycares, I think we have to keep teaching our history.
I love it. If I can just kind of piggyback on that, we have these documents, many of them. We need to read them for ourselves, right? It's really, really important that the education takes various forms. So, what does reparation mean? You can Google the UN or OHCHR. It's a great resource, and a lot of that work is work that, as we said, our ancestors and we have participated in. So, and that helps you know that reparations is restitution. There's 5 components: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. And that means that when you're in circles or people are talking, just casually, they can help envision and brainstorm and consider like what aspect of reparation could help contribute to a national plan. I think it's critical. Suppose tomorrow, and one of our colleagues that's on this is here today, often likes to toss out the idea, well, just say, some folks, maybe some of those smaller countries in the 123 say, you know what, I didn't do all that much and I have a little money and I'm out. Let's cut this check. Where does it go? Who does, what's the plan? So one of the things that, our ancestors always said is, you need to stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So that's the now. That's it for me.
Thank you. That's the now. Jam, turning it over to you for Q&A.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been a really robust conversation, so I'm so glad to hear from all of you. Now we're going over to Q&A. Everyone in the chat, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A because the chat is going so fast, I won't be able to see all of your questions if they're in there. So put it in the Q&A for me. All right, so the first question is from Akinyele Imoja. And this is, how should reparationists and the African descendant community see the visit of the British monarch to the U.S. as it's being celebrated in the media here?
Jasmine, I see you shaking your head, so go on and respond to that question.
I'm shaking my head because when I got on the train early this morning, I saw a man, one of our brothers, playing the trumpet, and it was like, "Welcome, King Charles." And I just get a visceral reaction because, as our sister Belle pointed out, the UK was one of the primary architects of chattel enslavement and colonized over 80% of the world. And so I don't receive that visit necessarily with like warm welcomes. There has to be an element of critique there where we understand, like, where does that power come from and why do we still celebrate it to this day without critique? So that's just my visceral reaction. I think it's again another moment of reflection, but for some people it's another moment to continue to deny the history, as it was denied in that vote on March 25th in the UN. So we have a tension here that it doesn't get resolved, but it's something that we have to keep pushing and we have to continue to be critical of.
I see, Roger, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly. I think it's his visit is a reinforcement of really of white supremacy. It's Donald Trump trying to equate himself with the king for whatever that's worth. And I think we should look at this in this 250th year from the perspective of Dr. Gerald Horne's book, The Counter-Revolution of 1776, to see 1776 not as a victory for the colonists, but as a victory for those who wanted to continue to enslave African people. And so that he calls it a counter-revolution, because the real revolution would have been the freeing of enslaved Africans.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that question? All
We'll
right.
move on
So
to the next one.
okay, so the next one, Dr. Angela Salas says, does the diaspora expect that Ghana will advocate for reparations for the descendants in North and South America, or is it clear that the reparations acknowledgement is focused on artifact restitution or reparations fund governed by Ghana? What is the aim or next step after the resolution that has passed?
Jasmine, take it away. I see you coming off of mute.
Yeah, so I just want to provide some context as to how Ghana became the voice on this topic. Um, 2023, when the African Union really put its political weight behind the topic of reparations, they chose to dedicate a year to reparations, justice for Africans and people of African descent, um, with reparations as the primary focal point. And then we are now in the decade of reparations, the first of its kind through the African Union. So in the past few years, the African Union has really become a supporter of reparations for not just Africans on the continent, but Africans in the diaspora. And as a part of that commitment, Ghana was appointed as the African Union champion on reparations. So, in a sense, what we're seeing is our African brothers and sisters um, come in solidarity, but also in political courage behind the topic of reparations in a way that some would argue did not exist at the Durban conference 25 years ago. The second point of around um, whether Ghana will be able to like speak on behalf. I think what Ghana wants to do is be the rallying force, not necessarily um, the voice, the solo voice, but really being the rallying force that is bringing us together from the different corners of the world on in alignment on the topic of reparations. And from what I'm seeing, this is one of the issues that people of African descent and Africans feel so strongly about and have such great potential to actually unify. It's like if we are not able to agree on many things, reparations is a thing that we are coming into agreement on, and there's a real momentum and groundswell around it. And I think this connects to another question that I saw in the chat, which was around like where are the diverse representations on reparations across the African diaspora, because you do have countries like Brazil, Colombia, the Caribbean, all the CARICOM countries, the United States, and the Afro descendants who were in Europe, and the our African brothers and sisters who are on the continent. And so we have like a very diverse history. And our global story hasn't really been told. I think we know our national history, but we haven't had the chance to understand the collective history, the history where we look at where was everybody on this particular timeline and how did our stories connect. And I think that that's what is going to be emerging as the reparations conversation grows, and becomes better connected. For far too long, the reparations conversation has been one where we are in our individual countries fighting for reparations, fighting for justice. And now those pockets of the reparations movement are coming together as one collective effort that is getting more aligned and getting more powerful. And so I say that because from depending on your vantage point, it might appear that Africa is, taking this forward without consultation, or without coordination. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I say we as people who are in our individual countries, but also trying to connect the dots across the global movement. And so Latin America, if you look in the resolution, you'll see reference to some of our ancestors who were in Brazil, who were in the Caribbean, who have inevitably contributed to it. So that kind of just goes back to what I was saying about protecting our memory, because we don't want stories to get erased, not by our oppressors, but not even by ourselves. We don't want one region story or one one name or one movement to dominate the global conversation, but to make sure that as we build this out and do this work more intentionally, that we acknowledge the contributions and the nuance of history across the various regions. Hope that
Thank you,
answered your question.
I seem to be the one who always sees Roger's hand. So Roger, did you want to respond to that question?
Yeah, just one. I think Jasmine answered most of it in that it wasn't a Ghanaian resolution; it was an African Union resolution. I would just differ a little with Jasmine around that Durban. That the Durban Declaration was a result of the African countries coming together to do that. South Africa was put under so much pressure. One of their representatives told me, he said, you would not believe how much pressure the United States was applying to us to get reparations removed from the agenda of the World Conference. And the United States kept saying, you know, if you don't do this, we're not going to participate in this conference. And if we don't participate in this conference, then the conference cannot be a success and we'll pull the other Western countries. So there really was a union of African countries, and also in one sense, because they agreed at that point, we're not going to push the question of colonialism. We know it's difficult enough just to get them to deal with the question of the transatlantic slave trade and reparations for that. So people backed off the question of colonialism at that point, and knew that we'd be able to bring it up at another point. So I think there's a history that I think Durban right through here instructs us in terms of, you know, when sometimes black folks say, you know, black folks can't do anything together. Well, we have a history where we have shown that we can do something together. And I think that's what we need to draw from that.
Thank you so much, Roger, for that additional context. The next question from Robert Harvey. From personal opinion, which movement was the most impactful toward liberation? The civil rights movement, the Fruit of Islam and Black Muslim movement, the overthrow of apartheid in South Africa, or the Black Power movement of the Black Panthers, which bared the best fruit toward freedom and liberation, mind, body, and soul on the global stage, in your opinion?
I want to say something first before our panelists do, if I may. I don't think it's a matter of which was the best or which was the most, productive. Each movement fed off of the other. I mean, everyone was working together. I mean, and I would not like to just constrain the Black Power movement to just the Black Panther Party. I just want to say that, as well. This is all a part of, as Jasmine was talking about, making sure we do know our history and the various movements involved. I'm going to stick in the New African Independence movement, but again, it was not just one movement. Okay, we all were working together in tandem. And I say we, I'm talking about the collective we, not necessarily me. A lot of that predated me, so I don't want us to get caught in that particular traps. I just wanted to say that before our panelists go on to say whatever you want to say, if you have anything to say to that question. But thank you for the question.
You said what I was going to say in a different way. I'll just add a little bit more because it's not either or. But if we use that list that was just shared, then we forget about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey and others. And, so I think it's important that continue. That's why I said I absolutely tangibly felt the ancestors in the rooms. Both at the African burial ground and on the floor as the debate was being prepared, and then the vote happened. So I think your answer is what I would share, and just remembering that there are many more, as well as those unnamed, unknown sisters and brothers who lived and died so that we could be here today carrying this part of the movement forward.
Thank you so much, Vickie. I'm trying to bounce around the questions.
Yeah, or group some because we're cutting out of time.
So
work your magic.
Okay, we have a couple of folks asking for the 5 components of reparations to be listed or discussed.
Vickie,
Well,
take that away. I'm just I'm calling on for.
All right. And again, Google AI, it's there. It's really straightforward. But this is I won't even say the UN definition. This is the generally accepted international definition. And by the way, even those folks that walk out and say that they're abstaining or they're not a part of these formations and mechanism internationally have signed on. So it is restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. So, in the interest of time, again, take a look at, that's what I'm urging, is that we read what is on the books to know what the definitions are that have been articulated and agreed on, and then let that be our floor, right? We can expand from there and envision what would constitute full reparation for each of us, wherever we are. But we must not be limited to only the check. And I do want the check. My ancestors lived and died and fought very, very hard in the South and other places to ensure that we wouldn't necessarily still have to be doing this right now. So, as much as I love the continent, I love Africa, and I intend to continue to live there as much of the rest of my life as I can, I'm not abandoning literally blood, sweat, and tears that our ancestors have planted here. The last thing I want to say about that, too, is that, please, 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 don't leave it up to someone else. Like somebody else is going to take care of this. No, each of us needs to be involved.
thank you,
Check
Vickie.
and choice I see there, and land and everything else. And to your point, our cultural, if there's, cultural heritage, the right to cultural heritage as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Vickie. I'm not sure how we are on time, Nkechi. How many questions you think we can?
Well, our hard stop is 2:15. It's 2:10
Okay,
now.
so I'm sorry to everyone if we couldn't get to your questions. This one, though, by Madeline Schwerb, I would want to ask, who should repair the harm? The institutions that hold objects, the Swiss state, or private companies that historically profited? And along that, just to tie in another question, someone also asked about some of the museums that hold artifacts. So just to tie all that in, who should repair the harm?
All of them. I
All
think
of
all
the
of them.
above.
They're all tied together. I think all of them.
I agree. That's what
I
we saw in
mean,
the chat.
all
I'm
right,
sorry.
yeah, go on.
No, I'm going to come right back to you, Brother Roger. I just wanted to mention, so we do things, we collectively, and anyone can do, these kind of education forums, as we call them, side events or side sessions around all of these international convenings. And I urge more and more of us to continue to do that. But one that we hosted just a couple of weeks ago, leading up to the permanent the PFAT, we call it, in Geneva, I was encouraged to hear someone, basically say exactly what we're just saying. It's all of the above. And then we even need to build on, just envisioning. Talk to youth, talk to elders, to whomever, and ask people, what do you think? We can't rule anything out. I'm sorry, Roger.
No, that was it. Certainly the Swiss state, but all of them, they're all a part of the same mix. And so we can't let those distinctions obscure the fact that they're all they're all part of it.
Then may I say this quickly, and this kind of builds on, again, what Jasmine has said about, knowing our history, not forgetting, but some of it we just don't know. And it's by design. One of the folks in that side event is doing a ton of work around the Benin bronzes, right? And her point is that as diasporans, if things only go back to, the origin country, then her children will never see them, will never know. But beyond that, the research and the history is that these were created out of, how did she say it? They were a product of laundering money, if you will, that was exchanged, these bars, that was exchanged for men and women in trafficking. So sometimes we don't even know that, how the art and spiritual pieces came to be built. They were based on things that were exchanged for chattel, for people. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Or even in terms of our history, reparations, the person you're talking about, I think, is Deidre Farmer-Pahlman.
Yes.
And she was instrumental in the reparations lawsuit we brought in 2002 to sue 17 corporations for their role in the transatlantic slave trade. She was the catalyst for it, and she was the first plaintiff. So people need to know her name when we're looking at the history of the reparations struggle in the United States, as well as internationally.
Roger, for uplifting the name of Attorney Deidre Farmer-Pahlman. I think we are really at time right now. We just really want to thank our very incredible panelists, Member of Parliament Bell Ribeiro-Addy, Harvard Scholar Jasmine Mickens, Attorney Roger Wareham with the December 12th Movement, and independent human rights expert Vickie Casanova-Willis, who I might add, whose late husband was Stan Willis, a stalwart pioneer in this whole field, a name you must never forget. But we thank you all for your insight, for your wisdom, for your unwavering commitment to justice. What we have heard today makes one thing abundantly clear, that the recognition of the transatlantic trafficking in human beings and racialized chattel enslavement as the gravest crime against humanity is not the end of the journey. It is a threshold, because a door has been opened, but it's up to us. It's up to us to walk through it. Recognition must lead to repair. Truth must lead to accountability, and history must lead to transformation. So let this moment not be one we simply commemorate, but one which we activate. The recording from this session will be available. It lives on YouTube, on the Nkechi Taifa Experience YouTube channel, and I'm sure probably on National Black Cultural Information Trust. But everyone who registered for this webinar will have access and get a copy of the recording. So again, thank you very much, and be on the lookout for the next in the series of the Reparation Information Thought Series, hosted by National Black Cultural Information Trust and Reparation Education Project. Thank you all for joining, and thank you, audience.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.